Okay, this is our last session of the day, and it is an open forum Q&A. We have our faculty members here, Dr. Heather Wilkins, Dr. John Stanford, Dr. Kenneth Seldine, got it, and Dr. Michelle Pritchard. Great. I have a few questions in case nobody else has any, but in the meantime, anyone in the audience have questions based on things you've heard or didn't get to ask in terms of the grant review process, the grant submission process, or anything like that? Love it. Okay, so I'll kick it off and hopefully, oh, we do. Oh, great.
Actually, I have on the writing part. So talked about the specific aims and how it was related to the first that is considered a weakness, but somehow it will be also related to one and another, right? The specific aims. For example, in the RO, we will have some aims regarding training, and based upon that, we'll propose something in our. I think in K99 we'll have aim regarding training, and based upon that, we'll propose something on the RO, right? So how do we make sure that the specific aim are independent, but at the same time it is related? So it is, how do we make sure it is not considered as weakness, but if it is too independent, then it may also consider as a weakness, right? So is there a suggestion to that?
I think that's really field specific. So I think you go into your K99 knowing the direction that you want your research to take when you're independent. You have to identify the gaps in your knowledge, and that would really form what your K99 aims would be. And then, use the training and the knowledge that you gain in those two aims in some ways to formulate what your R00 aims are going to be. But also remember that your R00 aims can't change because you do apply for the R00. You also want to be careful because, you can't have your R00 aims be dependent on the success of your K99 aims. So it's like it's a fine line. And I would just say that this is where having your specific aims, a draft and circulating it around to get feedback ahead of time is going to be really important.
Was that K99 R00 related question, or just a general interdependence?
Like in general as well, like how do you make
specific
sure
aims?
specific...
Yeah, that's it. I mean, it's tough. I mean, it's a tough issue because you want it to be integrated. I'm probably not the best person to ask this question because my colleagues have better grant success than I do. So,
yeah, I mean, I would just echo what Heather had just said here. I mean, you just want to make sure that you ask around, have other people read your aims, because the big question you have to answer yourself is, if aim 1 fails, will that somehow affect aim 2? And, if you feel that that's not the case, then I think you're heading in the right direction.
Or you could do like, okay, this is what I'm hypothesizing will happen, but if we get the opposite, it's not going to then. So it might change things slightly. Is that how you might change things slightly, but it's not going to undo all of the rationale behind why you would do the other aims?
Yeah, I mean, typically I go a couple different directions with my grants. One would be that I'm looking in aim 1 at more of the mechanistic side of things, and 2 more of the phenotypic aspects of a particular hypothesis. Another way would be in some cases I may even use different model organisms for one aim to the next aim. So there's different ways to break it down. And again, yeah, if your hypothesis is proven correct or if it's proven incorrect, just make sure that either direction will allow you to somehow get to aim 2 and make that one independent and work on its own.
Yeah, I don't know, maybe like you're asking a question about what is the function of this protein? You know, in a particular system. So maybe AIM-1 focuses on, you know, some unique aspects of, I don't know, I study mitochondria. So I'm going to look at how protein X affects, you know, mitochondrial energy production and respiration in AIM-1. And then maybe in AIM-2, I'm going to look at a different, you know, outcome for mitochondria, like protein import or, you know, mitochondrial DNA and mitochondrial biogenesis or mitophagy. But then they're not dependent upon each other. But so you have your overall hypothesis and you're using your two aims to answer your overall hypothesis. But within your aims, you're testing different questions. Does that kind of make sense in some ways? So that would be like from the basic science side. From a clinical side, like for biomarker development, what I've done in the past is, you know, we have AIM-1 is, for example, going to develop mitochondrial based biomarkers. And then in AIM-2, we're going to look at proteostasis based biomarkers. And the reason why these are different is because they are different things, but they're also interrelated because mitochondria play a role in proteostasis, just like as an example. But they're not dependent upon each other. If one AIM fails, you still have the other AIM. So does that make sense? So it's very specific about your project, and that's where getting that feedback is important.
Yeah, I can't say enough about having other people look at your aims. I mean, there's lots of mechanisms to do that. There are groups that invite you to present your aims, and they'll, you know, they'll affect your they will tear them down and make you feel, you know, really kind of bad, but you know, it's still good for your self-esteem. That's what I was getting at, but it's good for your aims. It's good.
Better than the study
That's
section,
right.
right?
I'm coming from friends and neighbors.
Yeah.
you know, it's-
You want
Yeah.
them to do it so the study section doesn't fit, right? So.
And one other small thing to add also is we're in the era of multidisciplinary research, and finding collaborators will allow you to put different emphasis on your different aims. Another different direction.
Michelle, did you have something to add?
Oh, there's a-
No, well, I was gonna add something minutes ago, but it may not be relevant anymore. But back to the K99R00, I had one of these too. It was really tricky to kind of plan what you want to do with the R00. You really didn't know what was going to happen with the K99, but you do get to kind of reimagine things. And actually that worked out to my benefit. So even though what I had proposed in the K99, the R00 are very sound, logically speaking, and everybody bought it and it sounded terrific. Parts of it didn't work, but it ended up being better. And so I could kind of modify the R00. So one of the things my mentors have always told me is, I mean, it's contract, so to speak, but if you discover something that takes you in a better, more exciting direction, that you should go ahead and do that. So some of that makes me feel less stressed out about, oh my God, what if this isn't absolutely perfect, you know, at every single level, and I don't do what I said I was going to do. But if you come up with something that's even better, then you should pursue that. And yeah, it's actually a great thing when that happens. It's very exciting.
So you were told your grant was a contract? Because I don't see them.
No, because you know, you're you know, signing things, what have you. But yeah, that was for me when my mentors told me, yeah, don't think of it like that. It was very mind opening. It allowed me to not be hurdled or hobbled is the word I'm looking for by what I said I would do. So
Yeah,
to think about.
It's probably terrible, but it's like get the money
Yeah.
and then do the work that you want to do.
Yeah.
But make sure that it's still related to the grant and that you're getting those publications so that when you do your yearly progress reports, that you're showing that you're actually doing things. Yeah.
Yeah, and then one other very critical thing is talk to your program officer.
Yeah.
You know, share your aims with them. They'll help you out and like, guide you in the right way.
So, I heard it like mentioned a couple of times where it's either a minor or moderate issue that's been discovered. And there are some comments where someone was like, oh, it's fixable, but I want them to fix it. or it's fixable and I believe in their mentorship team that it'll get fixed and so it's okay. So is there like a bias towards like resubmission? like people don't necessarily, you know what I mean? Like, cause I've had like, this is like kind of out there, but I've had some professors that are like, I don't really giving out A's because like A's are like the pinnacle. And unless you're just absolutely, 100% off, across the board, unbelievable, I'm not going to give it to you. So is that kind of maybe like a bias that it's like, go ahead and resubmit it and try again and it can be better?
There's always bias.
Okay.
Study section, they're human, we're humans, right? I've heard people make comments recently in study section like, I never give a 1. And then so it just, yeah, I mean, and then I've read terrible grants, but people had friends on study section, and so the score got driven lower than it should have been, honestly. And I think I made some enemies that day.
And the problem is that very, very, very few grants should get a 1. And if you're scoring the way you're supposed to be scoring, an average grant will get a 5. Now we think when we get a 5, oh, that's awful, that's terrible. But to give if someone's given 1s every time they serve on the study section, they're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
And now you can give 1s for criterion schools for the applicant or whatever, but yeah, a 1 should be very rare, as should a 9.
Yeah, and these scores are all relative. We put in a VA grant and we got a score of 290, and that put us at 58 percentile. So 290 is 29 on the NIH scale, but I mean the VA, sometimes you'll see like the score compression where everyone seems to get great scores, and that doesn't help you differentiate who gets those grants.
And you can I was gonna say, like, you can tell when study sections are angry. So like I got or just scores are pushed, I guess, higher or worse, but your percentile is actually pretty good. Cause like, I've been in study section where I think I've gotten an impact factor of like 40 something, but my percentile was 25. Wow. So that kind of tells you, right? And that's why they percentile them, so that if one grant goes to one study section and gets a worse score, they calibrate across study sections to try to account for that bias across study sections, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It does. 'Cause it just seemed like it was like, it's fixable. Like everybody understands, like that's not like a fatal flaw, but someone could say, no, I want them to resubmit. And then someone else might say, no, it'll get fixed. So
yeah,
like,
and it depends on the grant mechanism, because training grants are not percentile.
No,
right?
most of them are not.
Yeah, so it's based on impact factor. And your institute will say like, we're gonna fund K99s at this level. And so you could still get funding, but I don't know if you've talked about this yet. Your PO will ask you to reply to reviewer comments before council, so that because when they go to council, they want to be like confident that you are going to address those reviewer critiques. So even if you're going to get funded, you still have to respond to those reviewer critiques. And so that's why reviewers want to note those weaknesses. It's not necessarily because they want you to resubmit, but even if this is going to go up for funding based on the score, they want to make sure that those critiques are addressed, and they will be, because you still have to address them with your program officer and with council. So you write a 2-page response to the reviews and send that to your program officer. So
I will just say it is frequent that you have to resubmit your grants, and what was not discussed on a first submission can often score very well on a resubmission. So to not get discouraged, that sometimes, like we heard in the earlier session, they want to see you make those changes and show that you can think through all of this and address the concerns to get funded.
I actually want to say one thing about that. So it's not it's not like a manuscript review. So you get the comments back from the reviewers and you satisfy all those and then bingo, you're going to get your paper in Nature. You can address all the previous reviewers' comments and do worse.
Mm.
And the reason why I talked to my SRO about this when I started on study section is because oftentimes it goes to different reviewers. And I'm like, but that's dumb. And he said, well, it's not a manuscript review. Okay, well, tell me why this is better. And he went on to say that, think about how much money the NIH is giving out in one of these awards and how they want to have as many eyes and brains on it as possible. So if they can, they'll give it to an entirely different team of experts to review. And then maybe they find a fatal flaw that that first group didn't see. So it can go both ways. I mean, nobody wants that to happen, of course, but think about it from the perspective of it's not a manuscript review. It's not guaranteed, but the funding rates they are higher. The second time around, statistics have shown that.
We've all had it happen. You know, you get scored and then you get not discussed.
Yeah.
It's horrible.
Okay, I'm hoping the panel can weigh in on how do we as grant writers make things easier for reviewers?
White space,
Yeah.
graphical abstracts, pictures, cartoons, don't. Yeah, they're tired. They've read a bunch. So yeah,
Try
make
to-
sure you use space.
Legible fonts, kind of legible figures.
Yes.
Like,
Oh God, not too
a lot
small.
of people cheat on the
You're-
figures. and
God,
try to-
have to blow everything up. I mean, it's all electronic now, but way back when, I remember my mentors telling me, I can't read this. And they take out a magnifying glass. At least, we can blow it up, but that's completely inappropriate. Shouldn't do that.
It is, especially for me, because I don't review mine electronically. I print them. Because I'm old and, I like holding it and writing on it. And if it's small, I can't do that.
Yeah. I mean, also think about the fact that like I'm reviewing these grants after I put my kids to bed. I've already had a long day, tired. If I don't see white space at all and it's just a wall of text with no figures, I'm already irritated. Yeah.
Another thing is writing. I come from a psychology background, so, a liberal arts. And so my writing, I was very proud of how many phrases I could fit into a long sentence. And when you're writing your manuscript or your grant proposal, most of your sentences should not have even one comma. None of them should have more than one. Please do not write some sentence that I've got to hold everything in my brain while I work through 4 or 5 lines of text. I mean, terse, large font.
Grant like that. And it was an entire paragraph was a sentence. I was like, why?
It's like a William Faulkner novel.
And don't use fancy words.
Right, no.
Use the simplest language. We're not there trying to figure out what your GRE score is in vocabulary.
Right.
You just want to understand what you're trying to do.
Utilize is 3 syllables. Use is 1 syllable.
Use.
Always use the word with fewer syllables.
And define your acronyms, please. Because I don't want to have to try to figure, if I have to try to figure out what it is, I may not put the extra effort in.
Use them very sparingly.
Yeah, like this grant used a bunch of acronyms like PWD, person with dementia. Why?
What? That's not even a thing, is
It's
it?
not even a thing. Don't make up acronyms. Please do not make up new acronyms. Because then I have to train my brain while reading the grant to understand what that acronym is every time. So do not make up new acronyms.
So they
I-
must have used it 400 times and I don't write that phrase. And then they're like, my God, I'm half a page over. And they're like,
Yep.
Yeah.
we're going to turn that into an
Oh,
acronym.
don't. Yeah.
I think I had an IWPD, individuals with Parkinson's disease. And I was like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
What are you doing?
One of the other things I like, and to the point of being tired, because you can never get these things done during a day. You're busy at the bench, you're doing a million meetings, and so it's still literally 7 o'clock at night before you're sitting down, or at least for me, before you can look at these again. Is I like it when the grant writer is telling me where I need to focus my eyes. So not overuse of bold and underline, but enough so I'm like, oh yeah, key point. This is great. Okay, right. And that just helps keep me motivated and looking for the things I need to be looking for.
Put your dependent variables in a table with the units. I mean, this was advice given to me for a proposal I wrote up a few years ago, and I had the dependent variables and the units in my paragraph, and my collaborator said, put that in a table so people can see it and refer back to it. It's very, very reader friendly when you do that.
And I think it just goes back to imagine you're that reviewer at 3 a.m. having to get this thing read.
Mhm.
You do to make that job easier.
I think largely we all tend to want to propose too much. And so you run into this problem where you end up with the 12 pages back to back text. And if you find, or 6 in the case for the trainee grants, but if you think about, oh my God, I can't cram this all in, then you're probably trying to do too much. And so when I'm at that point, I'm like, oh boy, here I am, page 15. So then I just, okay, what can I get rid of and how can I focus? And that way you can engineer that white space that's so important in the grant to help your reviewers get through it.
They used to teach us to include when you're in your citations in your text the names of the authors, but I used to do that, but now I see grants with the numbers, abbreviations, and that makes it easier to read, I think, using numbers, and you just go to the reference list. So I don't think that's good advice anymore
I agree, because it could be 2 lines of
at all.
You're like, wait.
And you can fit more in.
Out of the text.
You can fit more in your
Yep.
page limit too.
You can also superscript your reference
Yep.
numbers and it takes up less space.
Yep.
All right, thank you. This might be related to what we just discussed, but if there's anything additional, what have you learned about grant writing now that you've been on this other side of reviewing that has changed your the way you write grants?
I cannot overemphasize the importance of a quality diagram. Seriously, you're told to review grants. Maybe you're not the sole expert in this area. Maybe you know a little bit of it, but like a diagram, just kind of framing the grant, does wonders for clarity and helping me to understand. So I do appreciate that, and we'll do that in my grants all the time to help with clarity.
Have someone outside of your field read at least your specific aims to make sure that if someone from the study section isn't an expert in your area, that they can understand what you're doing. Make sure that your aims answer the research question. They answer the hypothesis, because I see a lot of grants that just throw a lot of really fancy type omics data, and I'm like, you're just trying to make this appealing in what you think is innovative, but you're not answering the question. And innovation doesn't have to be a fancy new technique. Innovation can also be thought, and things like that, new information. So
make sure your bio sketch is tailored to your application. What some things I found that were other reviewers thought were really important, and it kind of educated me, was making sure that you have good collaborators, even if you don't think you need them. It doesn't hurt to add someone on there if it's related to the proposal. There's one more I was gonna say. Yeah, one thing that will really, you're supposed to do it, and it's part of rigor and reproducibility, but power analysis for your subject, whether it's animal or people, that's based on either the same or a similar outcome measure. I mean, that if you have a solid power analysis, to me, that really shows that this person's really thought this through, and relatedly, pitfalls and alternative explanation. I still see stuff come in through internal grant stuff here that doesn't include that, and it's like, okay, well, that's not good. You got to anticipate problems.
And you can do power analyses with cell-based approaches too, you should, as well as having a primary outcome. You know, what is the outcome for your aim? That's going to answer that question. Because the more outcomes you have, you can have something primary that you're looking at. It's just, so having a statistician talk to you about your project can be really helpful, even if it's a cell-based project in vitro.
And I guess I would just add, try not to cheat. What I mean by that is sometimes, like we mentioned with the small figures, but also like you have sections where you describe your animal usage and your human studies, and some people try to add new information in those sections, and that could be dangerous.
That made me really angry once, so I did score a grant terribly because they did that.
Does everyone know what that means? So like for your vertebrate animal section or the human subjects section, some people will try to add additional information that they couldn't squeeze into the grant research strategy, but that's not allowed. That can have more in-depth information, but it has to be already included in your grant portion.
I'm actually pretty certain that was the grant that was wall-to-wall text too. So I was just
That one was going down.
I wasn't the only one, thankfully.
Did you have more?
Can be, and I'll just say one more thing. The justification can be a polarizing issue, and as in text and paragraph justification. I cannot stand full justified, but I know other people like it. We're submitting our K-Embry renewal, and it's fully justified because my boss likes it, so I have to bite my lip. But I like left justified, and I don't know what the point is of saying this, but
If only you could query the study section ahead of time.
I know. I mean,
I'm a justifier. I don't know.
you can't tell a difference?
When I'm reading it, I
That's
can't tell the
interesting. So I'm a
difference.
justifier. He's left or.
I like a
in the
left
middle. This is
justify when I'm
balanced.
typing in Word because I hate how it moves around
Uh-huh.
when
Yeah.
you have it the other way. But like when I'm reading a grant, it's not like I'm like, oh, they left justified this or
Well,
they,
everything's
like,
left justified, right? I mean, it
weird.
all starts from the same, but the right, I don't
No,
I
yeah,
don't like
like-
stuff.
Walls.
Yeah,
Maybe that's clean.
anyway,
OCD.
so
I'm with you, Ken.
maybe it doesn't matter, but
What I've heard is that it can make it easier to read because when it doesn't all end at the same spot, you can better find where you were to read.
I wonder if anyone's done any research on that.
Note to self, Google later.
Okay,
We'll need half of you to, submit justified, the other half left, and let us know.
did you have a question?
Yeah, on the concept of independence. So for these transition grants, they want you to have this perfect balance between a great mentor-mentee relationship, and odds are you're building on something that you're already doing with your mentor, but they don't want you to be competing for projects with your mentor. Like, what strategies have you guys seen that are successful conveying that you're not that you have that relationship, but it's not the same, that you are independent, but you're not independent yet, really. It's so hard to find the
You
word.
got to have that conversation early. So, and it's not an easy conversation to have. So you just need to sit down and talk about it.
But how do you convey to the grant reviewers that you're going to achieve that?
You're gonna have a letter of support from your mentor.
So it's all in the letter of
And
support,
they
yeah.
should talk about how you have driven the grant's ideas.
Do they have to promise they're not going to study what you
No.
study, even though they
No.
got you started with it?
It's enough to say, this person is taking this, which, this person has this as their future. You know, I think that's,
Yeah.
they'll believe you. I mean, if you write it.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not that they can't, they're gonna be studying similar areas, but again, that's a conversation that you need to have with your mentor ahead of time. It's
He's
not
gonna
easy.
retire in 5 years. Would it help for him to put that?
Taking over things.
Yeah, that's exactly what my mentor did. She wrote an incredibly strong letter. And in that, she said, just as Dr. Wilkins just said, Michelle had developed this project, independent of stuff going on with the lab. Yes, I provided her resources to move this forward, and it's hers. I'm not touching it with a 10-foot pole, essentially. And it was very clear in the letter, and she never did.
And it might help too, if that's part of your training plan, to learn some technique that lab doesn't do or can't do. And, you know, so I don't do any cell culture stuff. So if someone wants to do that in my lab, and you don't see anything like that in my publications. So they know that that's something completely
In
different.
a sense, is it a case of just like how well mirrored is your project compared to what your mentors have published previously?
I moved to a new model system that my mentor didn't know how to use it. So
For our lab, we do aging research, and our postdoc brought in a whole sleep angle that was brand new, but it's probably rare. I imagine most people follow close to what their mentors are doing.
Well, they have to, because they may not be funded to do their own little pet project.
Right.
Great. So on this line of training, can you speak to how do you weigh sort of creating this training plan versus creating the most impactful science, and how do those weave together? Do you have any advice or suggestions in that?
In the same grant, you mean, or a F award versus an R award?
In terms of like a K or an F, these are training grants, and so there's the training component to it. So can you speak to creating this science experiment that is also serving as a training plan? Does that make sense?
like, what's more important, the training plan or the science?
Yeah, and just how do you go about making decisions based on all of that?
They're both important.
Well, yeah,
And
and
I think the CDA we brought up was a pretty good example of this, where the applicant didn't really have certain areas of knowledge in what she was proposing in her study. So that should be mirrored in her training plan, that she takes statistics, that she takes different fields she needs.
so if anyone didn't see Ryan Thelmel's presentation, was it last week or the
2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago? He addresses this very, very well as the chair of a fellowship study section. And the training plan is paramount in these. And the research plan is there to train the trainee. So, you know, it can't be crap, but it's still, the training plan is the most important part. And that's probably recorded somewhere, and where he probably gives a better example of how to do that better than I can. But anyway.
I do think that from my experience and what I heard today, and then just what I've heard from folks I've known trying to get these career development awards, is that training plan is usually where it'll fail. So folks are like, Cash is like, I'll just throw something together. And it's like, I don't understand why you do that when everybody knows that this is the most important thing. And in fact, when I've done a couple of these throughout my training, and I found that to be the most challenging part. Because you don't necessarily know all the resources available. You don't know that you can go and learn how to do nano indentation at the NIH. You know what I mean? So you just have to spend a lot of time looking around and trying to identify the training resources that you can add to the training plan to get you the skills to do the science you propose to do. And so the science was easy. You're like, oh, I got all these ideas and hypotheses and preliminary data, and you could just propose to do this crazy, amazing stuff, right? But then trying to figure out how you're going to get the training to actually do it was such a challenge. Such a challenge. So yeah, that's where you got to spend a lot of time. I think the science part is easier.
Identifying what are the deficiencies in what you are proposing to do, and then what areas could actually be made stronger.
Yeah.
And what I thought was interesting that CDA was in their response, they said, well, we're going to audit some classes at the university. I'm like, okay, go back to school, literally.
That's because the reviewers are like, you need to take more classes. And
Yeah.
when I read that, I was like, poor person's a postdoc. But anyway, it's good to learn, but
All right.
Yeah, I mean, in like my A99, we said I was going to take classes.
Did you?
I'm gonna Google micro indentation.
Nano indentation.
Or nano, oh,
I did
Yes.
those.
pico one.
So I was like, so I implemented induced pluripotent stem cell cultures in my work, which is not something that my mentor had. So I had another mentor that knew how to do that. And then I also attended a like 1 to 2 week course at Stem Cell Technologies. So like, so it's really specific to what you want to do. But don't be afraid to ask people within your field if they have any ideas on like training courses you can take, things like that. So
I know Cold Spring Harbor
Yeah.
has a lot of
we have
training
lots.
options, so look that up and see if anything is relevant.
They used to have this program for like how to run a lab. I don't know if they still have it or not.
I don't know if they do, but there's a university that runs one. It's like a RO1 or a PI boot camp.
Yeah.
And I
so,
think
like,
it's in January. Columbia, is that where it is?
yeah,
Columbia University that runs it.
A99 studies actually keep that up.
Do
So-
they teach you how to navigate strong personalities in your lab?
I do believe that is part of it, is dealing with people.
Difficult conversation.
Yeah.
I don't remember that when I'm a lot older than these guys, but what I made use of was this Howard Hughes publication called Making the Right Moves, which you can download for free. They've updated it recently, so it must be still something that people refer to. And then there's also a cool book called At the Helm that my postdoc advisor had given me, and it teaches you some stuff how to do UPI. But I would much rather do a course, go somewhere for a week and do workshops, and that sounds a lot more fun to me, slogging through these things that were really thick. Probably reading those.
Do you have any advice for how folks should go about collecting their mentorship team?
What do you need to do your science?
Right,
Yeah.
PubMed. Then you type in your subject area plus KUMC, find some neighbors.
Yeah. Or if you want people outside conferences, your mentor should also help you introduce you to people if they're a good mentor.
Probably predominantly the mentor is gonna help
Yeah.
like 75% of this.
Yeah.
So for a K99 or K01, in trying to develop independence, you still keep your postdoc mentor as one of your people.
They're your primary.
They're the primary, and then you select additional folks to bring in that
Yes.
independence. Do you always have someone from outside the institution? Is that recommended?
I did. I had 2. And they're, well known in the AD field. I had 2 internal and 2 external.
So is it for standard or is
I
there?
think it's what you need.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mhm.
When you're reviewing, what's the first thing that you read in a grant?
I read the specific aims and then maybe the bio sketch. I know some people like to, when Ryan Thummel was here, he said he likes to read it from beginning to end. But I read the specific aims and the bio sketch first. And then I go through the other parts.
So like you, I like to print. So I print the specific aims in the research strategy. And I read the specific aims first and the research strategy. And then as I'm writing my critique, I go through and look at the bio sketch, the budget, and the vertebrate animals or anything else. The study section I'm on right now is purely preclinical models, so there's a lot of vertebrate animals. And then the resource sharing plan and the non-scorable items last, but yeah, it's the specific aims.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I do specific aims first, but I do a very quick read through the whole thing just to get the 20,000-foot view. Usually at that point, I'm like, this is a fantastic grant. And then as I start going into the details, that's where it starts breaking down, but.
Right.
I'll do specific aims first as well, but I'll do the specific aims of each one of the grants. I just finished doing this over the course of the last 10 days, reviewed 9 R01s. And so I'll look at those and the ones that are most compelling. I'm like, oh my God, I want to read this one. So I'll do the deep dive into them. I'll rank them and do them from best to worst. And because usually at the end, if a specific page is like a train wreck, the rest of the grant's going to be a train wreck. It can be really easy to manage. So it's like 9 p.m. on Sunday before grants are due. Like, no problem. Big old flaw right there. Move on. But when I'm fresh and enthusiastic about the grants, I want to pick those ones that look really good for their specific page. And sometimes they turn into train wrecks. But
It shows how important that page is.
yeah, it really is.
We heard in one of the earlier panels that when they're not the reviewer, they're a study section member and not having read the grant, that they'll read the abstract as the discussion is happening. And I know personally that often the abstract is the last thing I write and I'm the most exhausted and I just want to throw it together.
Yeah.
But if that's the only thing someone might be reading, that might be more, deserve more attention.
Yeah, everything's important. But you're right, the abstract to me is just a real nuisance. And I don't see the point of them, but they have them, so.
That's the project summary abstract.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's the one that if you do win the grant, it's displayed publicly
yes.
for everyone to read.
Ah, okay.
So you
Yes.
put the
Yeah.
30
So
lines,
at
your
the
whole
same
grant.
time, you don't want to give away your trade secrets in that. But you also have
Right.
to. Yeah, because
Yeah.
usually in the packet that the reviewers receive, that's one of the first things they'll see.
Yeah.
So it's like this weird balance you got to do there.
Yeah.
I had a grant recently where the specific aims were just the aims listed, like specific aim 1, specific aim 2, specific aim 3 with no background. It did not do well
Goodness.
for any of the 3 reviewers. So yeah, that was a first for me. It didn't take me very long to review it because the research strategy was also lacking as well. But yeah, but it was just like,
That's poor mentorship right there.
well,
Was
it
in
was,
R1?
yeah, it was in our, but still, like, yeah. I mean, most people would be like, oh, I'm super like happy, ecstatic that they got that grant because it takes them 10 minutes to review. And
Yeah, exactly.
We heard earlier that folks, especially in these training grants that are reviewing, want to see the path to the next grant or to your independent future. So do you have any advice for how you go about either figuring that out or getting that into the grant so that reviewers can better understand that path that you're creating?
Well, other than a future directions, I mean, that's what that's also at the end with pitfalls and things like that.
No, I just gotta say, you gotta first have a plan,
Yeah.
you know, so think about where you're gonna be 5, 10, 15 years down the line. Just gotta explain that.
Yeah, so think about if this grant is successful, what would be the next thing you would do? And then write a little bit about that. And maybe also think about if it's not successful, would I still be able to do that? Because reviewers are gonna be thinking about that as well.
I think for me, I would want to see kind of the 10,000 foot view. What is kind of the overarching theme for the candidates' research long term? So say it's how the stroma changes with age, for example. And as you have the K99 or the Career Development Award, you're going to answer some questions and what are kind of the next set of questions, but all under kind of that auspice. And to me, that would be pretty convincing. Like, oh, this is aging and stroma is my favorite thing in the whole wide world in this organ. And then just kind of build from there. So kind of a contextual framework for that, I think would, so far for me, in evaluating it.
And one thing I will say for the VA system is they like to see a trajectory for their investigators. So at the kind of the professor level, maybe even at the training level, they want to say, okay, if you get this project, what's the next step? So if you're at a preclinical, what's your pathway to actually making this clinical? If you're clinical, what's your pathway to making this multi-centered, project? And then if you're at that stage, then because the VA has steps at each one of these levels to get you to the next level. And if you pass that next level, then how do you actually implement this to be a veteran care? So you kind of want to think about your plan in that context of, this is kind of an important section of your VA grants. It's not an NIH grant, is what's the significance of the research to the VA. And in that, you want to just, kind of share what your trajectory looks like for getting your idea out there to actually help veterans.
Yeah, if you say this will help us identify new therapeutic targets for XY disease, you should be very explicit about what those targets are going to be.
Just a quick question. How many of you are actually considering like a VA funding line? Did I mention that for?
I saw this, I'm like, what kind of award is this? I've never heard it. Maybe you can try it.
I mean, fundamentally, money, yes, please.
Yeah.
That's
But
specific.
in addition, for most institutions, your VA salary gets added to your institutional salary, which is kind of a nice bonus to getting one of those grants. But there is a lot of extra work that comes with the VA grant. Basically, everything you have to do for the university, you have to do all the same IRB and everything for the VA. And you have those difficulties, but
They also expect some service too, right?
if you're an
Yeah.
MD, if you're a PhD, they may
too.
expect you to be like on the ICO committees and.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have another point you're trying to make?
Sorry.
Yeah, I was just saying, I'd never heard of it before, so when I looked it up, see like the 4 different sections of like how they, fund grants, and I was like, okay, well, I guess I'd be in clinical maybe. And then when I looked at clinical, it was like, oh, you need to be an MD or an MD PhD, and I was like, well, okay, like,
Yeah.
guess
they-
I don't
they call
qualify
them
for that
different
one.
Services. And,
Yeah. but I
for-
didn't think I fit really in any of the other categories. So
Yeah, I mean, you could look like rehabilitation and development, that's RR&D.
mhm.
That one has like 6 study sections, if you will. That like one is like aging, one is like just physical therapy. So you might see what different areas they have. But RR&D could be submitted to from somebody who is not a VA, has any VA standing. The general idea is that if you do get funding, then the VA promises to give you like a 5/8 line of support. I think let's see, VLR&D is more for the basic research type work, but that one you have to have VA standing to apply for it. Clinical studies, and then health services are the other 2. Health services is for like the multi-center large type grants, and clinical studies would be for just different areas and what rehab covers. The rehab also covers clinical studies.
You could ask, is it Ram Sharma who still runs that?
Yeah,
You could reach out to Ram Sharma and kind of tell him who you are. And feel free to email one of us. I mean, we've got.
draw me a line. I'll connect you with him. Sure.
As we're closing up on our time, is there one, like your biggest piece of advice, biggest suggestion that you have for folks, or anything that we haven't gotten to that you wanted to make sure you brought up?
I have one.
Please.
Just keep writing and submitting. It's like the lottery, right? You're not going to win if you don't play. But I think with every proposal you put together and with every bit of criticism or feedback that you get, whether it's prior to submission or from the reviewers, is going to help you be a better grant writer. And so the more you do it, the better you're going to get. And the more you do it, the more likely you're going to have that pre-doc and then that postdoc grant. And then that sets you up on a trajectory that's very impressive when people are evaluating you for faculty positions. They're like, well, I already had a pre-doc grant, postdoc grant, got the K99R00. There is nothing that's going to stop this person. And so that makes you look just really terrific. But you just keep writing and refining as much as you can. It's really, really important.
Enjoy failure. This is definitely the cornerstone of our career. Yes, you need to rephrase it some other term besides failure. It's more than a learning experience. It's a new adventure each time it happens.
Embrace.
Yes.
Everyone gets not discussed. It's not unique.
Yeah.
You're not alone. I've had more non-discussed than sport and funded grants.
And
So
what's the financial thing again? Prior events do not predict future outcomes. And so we had a grant that was borderline funded, and then it went from 18% to 25 to 30 to not discussed. So you never know, even though you're looking for, some feedback and help from those reviewers, you're not really sure if you fall in the same line. You just got to do your best each time.
Oh, but you got to keep trying, right?
Absolutely.
Do you guys know who Polly Metzinger is? Anybody hear of her? Have you heard of the danger theory for how the immune system works? Instead of the self, non-self, it's things that are dangerous is what the immune system is actually targeting. So you have a wound, it's dangerous, your immune system is going to go crazy. So I was an immunology PhD student, so I had the opportunity to meet her at a big graduate student run symposium. And we went bowling with her at night, one night. And she said to us that you're going to hit a lot of dead wood on your travels upstream. Never let some old white guy tell you your science is no good, because that's what happened to her. And so when I get these failures, I just think of Polly Metzinger and how wonderful she is and what an inspiration she was for me as a young person. And I just think about that. But hit a lot of dead wood on your travels upstream. Yes.
yeah.
Yes. Get back up on that horse.
In some ways it's like a lottery, right? You got to buy more tickets to win. So you can't get funding unless you apply. And the more applications you put in, the more likely it is you're going to get one.
Right, and you got to start early. I mean, your precious piece of last minute hot off the presses data is not going to make your grant get funded. It's not worth the extra time you could have spent writing a better, clearer grant. So always spend the time writing rather than collecting more data.
And
And regarding that, publications are currency, so do not neglect that. If you have no publications, it's going to be tough to convince them that you're to drive your applicant score in a positive direction.
And Dr. Stanford, you might be able to speak to this quite well. We're very fortunate that there are lots of internal, smaller grants that we're able to apply for, which can really help build that foundation of funding.
Right. So like the biomedical research training program is university wide, open for pre and postdocs across the this 3 schools. Julie Christensen runs that. It's a great way to submit an application based on a fellowship application template. We're working to get departments to use their written comps exams as an opportunity to allow you to develop fellowship applications. This is obviously just for pre-docs, but yeah, there are postdoctoral opportunities for internal fellowships.
Cambry.
The Cambry has one that's not going to be available as much to KUMC postdocs in the future as it has been in the past, since the program is requiring us to make a significant shift in funding toward our PUI partners. But we will be able to use university commitments to fund KUMC postdoctoral awards. So yes, we're going to continue that mechanism. But the number of awardees is going to decline to KU Med, KU, and K-State.
There are a couple T32 programs on campus as well. So
Frontiers, who we heard from, they have opportunities as well.
different institutes have pilot awards, like the KU Alzheimer's Center does. I don't know if the Cancer Center does. Postdocs can apply to them.
Oh, just general pilot
Yeah,
projects, yeah, well. Now the Diamond Center and aging.
and yeah.
Just got going. One other piece of advice I'd say is don't do it alone. I mean, have as many people as you can help you write, read, become friends with your program officer. That's probably most critical. They're always there to help you and help shape your project in the right direction as best they can. But yeah, there's help out there. And I think the university has grant writing assistance as well. I'm new here, but I heard something about there. They're starting.
Great courses, there's 2 of them, so there's one that Julie Christensen directs that's very targeted to, it's grad student, right?
Yeah,
Grad school.
F31, yeah.
But Vicki Cheng also does one that's probably more pre-doc, but I think a lot of the skills that you can learn from those 2 courses are applicable.
Yeah.
No proofreading service.
Well, we
Okay.
yeah, there's some scattered across different units and centers, but we're in the midst of interviewing a full-time scientific writer to join probably the IASC team is within the Office of Research in the School of Medicine to help edit and review grants before they go out, and manuscripts and things like that. So
Definitely the Frontiers folks. Dr. Nicole Nichols was just here. You might have missed that they provide free editing services, free support with any sort of science communication to all of our postdocs, grad students, faculty here. Before we close out, I just wanted to bring this back up. Again, postdocs, we want to highlight your work, so please scan the QR code on the left so that you can fill out this brief questionnaire. If you have feedback for us, it's the QR code on the right. We are taking all of your feedback and applying it to next year's mock study section. And then we also have started a postdoc monthly seminar series. So if you want to present your work, we would love to have you. Just send an email to kpa@kumc.edu and we'll get you signed up. And with that, if you all will join me in thanking our wonderful panelists. Thanks so much.
Thanks, buddy.